Your fingerprint is your own. There isn't another like it, which makes it perfect for identifying you, whether it be for security reasons or for convicting a criminal, which is why fingerprints have been used so long in history and why they still use it in court of law. Just think about how many cop shows there are and how often they talk about fingerprints. But something else that is completely distinguished identifier to you that all the cop shows miss. Your toe prints. Yes, your toe prints. Yes, your toes have fingerprints. Or should I say, distinctive marks that can identify you just as well as fingerprints. And that they are yours and yours alone. Which to my surprise has been used to catch criminals. So this episode, we're going to explore a few times in history that people have been caught by their toe prints. Now, fingerprints have a long history in humanity's growth, being used to identify and seal writing, deals, and all kinds of documents. Some of the earliest was done by the Babylonians, in clay, but would quickly be common all over the world. The Chinese were using it around 800 BC, other cultures adopted it and integrated it into their documentation. But the first time it was used for police work was in 1840 for the murder of Lord William Russell in England. And over the years, police and governments adopted the process of fingerprinting and using fingerprints to convict people or to prove people's innocence. And as time marched into the 20th century, the science and standardization of fingerprinting also grew along with it, becoming a profession and a science. But it would be a while in the fingerprinting game until a toe print would show up in a crime scene. Just for some background knowledge, your fingerprint and toe print both develop at the same time in the womb, and both are uniquely distinctive to you. The ridges, the arches, all the little details makes your fingerprint, and your toe print, your toe print. That being said, it is possible to be born without fingerprints, or toe prints. And technically speaking, every 1 out of 64 billion, or trillion, I can't quite remember, but 1 out of that astronomical number will have a duplicate fingerprint with someone else. So, if humanity survives long enough, there will be a day where a few people across all of humanity that have the same fingerprint. But, back to catching a tiger by its toe. By the mid-20th century, fingerprinting was started and to be used quite frequently and widespread amongst basically every country. And in 1952, one of the first things to come up in a crime scene happened. It's rare to be a first. A crime was committed, and all that was left behind was a toe print. And the crime? A burglar, a safecracker, broke into a Scottish bakery to steal the money in the safe. And the only piece of evidence that the crime had even been done was the money was gone, and there was a footprint. And within that footprint was a toe print on the flour-covered floor of the bakery. The police suspected a man, a William Gurley, and brought him in and compared his toe print to the one from the bakery. It was a match. And the UK in general has a long history of fingerprinting, so I'm not surprised that the Scottish may have been the first to identify a criminal by their toe print. With a matching toe print, they charged William Gurley with the toe print being the only piece of evidence for him robbing the bakery. I don't believe they ever found the money, but the lone toe print was enough. The jury convicted him in about 15 minutes, all off his toe print that he left in the flour. Some criminals are caught red-handed. I guess he was caught white-footed. But the 20th century spurred all types of different investigation methods into properly identifying criminals, thus birthed forensics podiatry, which is the forensic science which focuses on foot-related evidence in crimes. Shoe prints, footprints, and yes, toe prints. Many people in history have been convicted by shoe prints and footprints, but not many by toe prints. and some may disagree with me, saying that the 1952 bakery burglary wasn't the first toe print used in law, and say that it's Sir Sidney Smith in 1937. And I say no. Sidney Smith was identified by his footprint because he was missing his fourth toe. William Gurley was the first to be identified by his toe print. I would say those two things are very different. Anyhow, it'd be many years until another toe print incident was found at a scene of a crime. Surprise, surprise, most people don't run around barefoot, and most crimes aren't committed barefoot. The next one that I could find wouldn't happen until 1998, when another burglar was caught by his big toe. According to the Scottish Daily Record, a man by the name of Leroy Whitner broke into an old person's home, stole some personal items, and stole a car once he found a pair of car keys, leaving his toe print at the scene of the crime. Why did he do this barefoot, you may ask? Being that it's a logical question, Leroy had a history with the law, committing multiple crimes in his life and being caught in many different methods, one being fingerprints. So Leroy decided when committing this crime, he would take off his shoes and put his socks over his hands to hide his fingerprints. Not the worst idea. Now, you may ask yourself, didn't he put his shoes back on? Why is he barefoot when robbing the place? Another smart question. He didn't put his shoes back on. You see, Leroy had also been caught by his shoe print in the past. So he didn't put his shoes back on in case he would ever be identified by his shoe print again. So he entered the old people's home barefoot, shoes outside, with socks over his hands. And, unfortunate for Leroy, he left his toe print, specifically his big toe, at the scene of the crime, which was enough to help convict him, which is just hilarious. And I do want to point out, the UK, once again, catching people by their toes. And the most recent one I could find, which is probably the most famous one, a Colton Harris Moore, better known as the Barefoot Bandit. Just off the bat, the Barefoot Bandit should probably have a mini-series made about him and his escapades. It's a lot. There's so much that I can't go into all the details of his life and crimes. But Colton was born in 1991 in Washington State in America, and would have a rough childhood, and quickly fall into a life of crime. At age 9, run away from home a lot to live in the woods, he began to break into people's vacation homes, stealing food and camping supplies. By age 12, he would be convicted for this. He would spend all of his childhood and teenage years in and out of juvie, committing more crimes, being released, and the cycle continues. Mostly theft, and doing it barefoot. Enough times he did it barefoot where not only did they have his toe prints, but he started to become a folk hero to some. He would get the nickname the Barefoot Bandit. As he grew older, his crimes would escalate, and at age of 17, he would run from the law and keep stepping up his thefts, going on a crime spree of stealing cars and speedboats, breaking into people's homes, using people's computers to create credit cards with the homeowner's information, buying himself mainly equipment, one of his biggest purchases being that he bought himself night vision goggles with one of the fraud credit cards, stealing over 100 times in Washington, Idaho, and Canada area, and he would escalate from there to stealing planes. Yes, he started stealing small single-engine planes. And you may ask yourself, how does a teenager, a small criminal, go from stealing cars to stealing plane? Better yet, how does he learn how to steal a plane? Boy, you guys just have all the right questions today. Well, Colton would learn how to fly a plane by reading the manuals and watching, and I kid you not, a DVD called How to Fly a Small Plane. All this is happening in 2009. So armed with a few manuals and a DVD, he was able to steal and pilot a few planes, always having a little problem with the landing part. More of a crash landing rather than proper landing, but always getting away with it. Eventually, he was so sought after as a wanted man with numerous warrants and now awards for his arrest, he started to make his way east. stealing cars along the way. He would do this across Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska, Illinois, all the way to Indiana, where, in Bloomington, Indiana, he stole another plane and flew it to the Bahamas, where he crash landed. Trying to escape after crash landing, he tried stealing a boat, which the local authorities simply shot the engine of the boat, catching the Barefoot Bandit at age of 19. Eventually, the Barefoot Bandit was extradited from the Bahamas to America to face trial. Now, there was a ton of evidence used against him, and there's kind of no doubt that he did all these crimes. He bragged about it a few times. One time, on May 30th, 2010, he made a handwritten note with $100 attached for a vet saying, and I quote, "Drove by, had some extra cash. Please use this money for the care of animals. Signed, Colton Harris Moore, aka the Barefoot Bandit." End quote. So he wasn't exactly worried about his crimes, though he did plead not guilty. And you may be saying to yourself, where does the toe print come in? Was the toe print used to help convict him? Well, no. Though not used, it was a piece of evidence. That's right, his toe prints were evidence, which, though not used to convict him, was, I still believe, the last time a person's toe print was used in the criminal law. So definitely an interesting footnote. So yeah, a lot to unpack here. Toe prints are just as unique as fingerprints. There are entire professions to identify shoes, feet, and toes. And the toe prints have been used in history to convict people. And if you know any stories where toe prints have been used that I missed, please let me know. Researching this was kind of a nightmare and hard to navigate past fingerprints and find toe prints. But we live in a crazy world where you can literally be caught by your toe. So with that being said, thank you all for listening.